Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We're delighted to have you at a somewhat informal and, as you can tell, a bit impromptu program on Venezuela with two prominent and, I think, very notable individuals with expertise on Venezuela and what has been happening both in the run-up to the demise of Hugo Chavez and what has been happening since his demise. I'm very grateful to, let me say at the outset, I'm Frank Gaffney with the Center for Security Policy, and we're delighted to be sponsoring this program. We're particularly grateful to Congresswoman Eliana Ros-Lehtinen, who we had hoped would be here, and I know had hoped she would be here as well, and may yet come, depending on what happens with the consideration, apparently, of her resolution on Venezuela, which is on the floor at the moment. So, better that she's there, all things considered, than she's here, but we'll hope that maybe she'll come and tell us what has happened to that resolution. She has made it possible for us to be in this room, and we're very pleased to be here. We're going to hear first from Michael Rowan about the deterioration of democracy that has, of course, been underway for some time, but has continued to accelerate under the Maduro regime. He is a columnist for El Universal and Veneconomia. He is the author of Getting Over Chavez and Poverty, and the co-author with Douglas Schoen of Chavez, The Threat Closer to Home. He's been involved in the political life of Venezuela for some time, and I think understands keenly the challenges that that country is facing and what it can mean for the rest of the region and our hemisphere, and of course for this country as well. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Frank. And it's a pleasure to be here in the U.S. Congress and talking to people who are concerned about Venezuela. I'd like to just say that former Congressman Richard Sweat, my partner, happens to be here. I wanted to acknowledge the fact that this is your house, the people's house. And what I'd like to do is run through in about 15 minutes a PowerPoint presentation that shows you my analysis of the situation that we're in. I lived in Venezuela for 15 years. I'm married to a Venezuelan. My son is Venezuelan. I had to leave after the 2006 election. I was the strategist for Manuel Rosales. And because of security reasons that have become pretty obvious now, I think, to people who are living there. I didn't know you I didn't have a good attorney. So in any case, I'd like to go through this and then hand this off to my partner, Fleischman, who is going to do an overview also of some of the more penetrating policy questions that are facing this body here in the U.S. So let me start by saying you'll see up here the slides that I've prepared for this, and I've written a script because I'm a journalist, so I'm doing this straight out. The first thing I'd say is democracy is at death's door in Venezuela, and so is civil life. Here are the words of Nobel laureate and former Costa Rican President Oscar Arias on February 14th. 2 days after the massacre. Thousands of students and opponents of the government of President Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela were brutally attacked with firearms by the security forces, Arias wrote. What were the students protesting? Among other things, the worst homicide rate on the planet Earth. While the world is calling for investigations into the government motorcycle killers and how that was organized, and they're urging the Maduro government to respect law and the democratic charter, rogue states have agreed with Maduro that he's not responsible for the violence, but actually the victim of it. As Maduro's government sees it, U.S. diplomats conspired with students to overthrow the government. He closed down NTN 24 TV station for covering the story. As Venezuela creeps towards a military state with blacked-out media, paranoia combined with money, weapons, known terrorists has increased the security risk for the hemisphere. It's a disaster in the making. A little history here. And this is my analysis. Venezuela was the first Latin American nation to reject dictatorship for democracy. It was then dominated by two political parties. Media was privately owned and free for the entire period. TV was one of the most competitive and innovative industries in the country, according to a Harvard study by Michael Porter's economic group. That's in 1990. With one of the best consistent economic growth and inflation rates in the world and substantial middle class, Venezuela by 1970 was poised to become the first Latin American nation to join the rich nations. But it didn't happen. Just the reverse happened. From the mid-1970s to the present, state-command economies fell into oil dependence, political rents became more pronounced, corruption erupted on a massive scale, poverty and equality rose precipitously. When Chavez took over in 1999, these incipient failings were put on steroids, and since Chavez died, Maduro has doubled the dose. Meanwhile, neighboring states like Colombia and Brazil went the direction of free market democracies, easily overtaking Venezuela's huge advantage, and today Venezuela is mentioned with other failing states like Syria and Cuba and North Korea, Zimbabwe. Here's what happened. Harvard's Robert Klitgard, a key intellectual force behind Transparency International, developed this equation for corruption with Latin American political leaders 2 decades ago at Harvard. His unsurprising finding is this: a monopoly with full discretion and total secrecy institutionalizes corruption. Since 1999, the Chavez regimes have applied the M plus D minus A equals C to the economy and democracy in Venezuela with a devastating effect. And here's proof. The government and military were personalized around Comandante Chavez. Oil and the economy were owned by him. Over half the corporations that existed in 1999 are gone. The other half is on its last legs. The production capacity of the nation was intentionally suborned, even in oil. Recently, as the current currency hyperinflated, everything from food to toilet paper disappeared. Many private media reporting these events were fined. They were shut down, provided given to political supporters. But 80% of the TV channels wound up in the hands of the state, and Maduro recently started a new TV channel for the military. I'm going to end with a very ironic thing that's happening there. So, monopolies there. Discretion. Since 1999, $1.5 trillion has passed through the hands of government, most of it dictated by decrees to fund opaque projects in Venezuela all over the world. It is not an overstatement to say that virtually every transaction of government is as difficult to trace as the biggest drug deals in the world. The formal economy is effectively a black market. All powers derive from the commander. He's the ultimate decider about everything. To preach the revolution, the government commands all TV channels to cover its every word. It adds up thousands and thousands of hours every year. In presidential campaigns, Chavez spent billions of government money for himself, decreed a 22-to-1 advantage in TV time over the opposition presidential candidate, which was considered legal and fair by the National Election Commission. That was in 2006. I ran that campaign. When Peru's Fujimori did that, the world repudiated him. When Chavez did it, few took notice. Oliver Stone and Sean Penn praised him. Facts and figures are state secrets in Venezuela. This is a big minus accountability. No true accounting is made of to the public on oil production, currencies, GDP, electricity, homicides, poverty, literacy, disease, the homeless, the counting of votes, you name it. I work for Veneconomia, write for Veneconomia all of the economic facts, as far as Veneconomia is concerned, are complete fiction. Information falls into a black hole. As the saying goes, one finger can blot out the sun. Monopoly plus discretion minus accountability equals corruption. That's what you're seeing in Venezuela. It's no surprise what happened in Venezuela. Billions upon billions of dollars disappeared from the public accounts. They wound up in secret private accounts. Evidence of corruption against thousands of officials was ignored, but the accusers were jailed, including Judge Afuni, who made a habeas corpus ruling in a case that the commander disagreed with. So the judge went to jail. In September, every copy of the first edition of the book Rogue State, which you can see here, which documents wide-scale government corruption, disappeared from the bookshelves. You can get it on Amazon, probably the same with Louis's book. So the government's solution was to kick Transparency International out of the country and to pass another enabling law for Maduro. So that has precisely the opposite effect of the transparency you're looking for. Here I'm going to go through this very, very fast. I'm going to show you a little bit about the cocaine corruption and how the M plus D minus A equals C affects the cocaine business. I'm going to go very fast here. And then it goes into drug pins. The reason I'm going to go fast over this is that Luis is going to cover some of this in what he speaks, and this goes into some of the details to prove the thesis about M plus D minus A equals C. All right? What's interesting here about Chavez is that Chavez is seen as a national hero. And Capriles and Maduro are very, very close in terms of the public. The opposition does not have like any really creative idea, alternative, to propose to fight, and it has almost no voice, no money, no capacity to be heard by especially the barrio people, in which they could make the change. And so what are they experiencing? They're experiencing an enormous amount of looting, total chaos in the entire public sphere, hyperinflation, government sales of dollars, which are like absolutely, totally corrupt operation, putting everybody in the corruption business in the country, and selling dollars only to like the companies that are phantom companies that are really in favor with the government. You're ending up with what Mario Vargas Llosa and Oscar Arias, whose campaign I worked on at one time, say is like a total chaos and absolutely, corrupt and ridiculous situation. All right, what is the explanation that the government has for this? They say they believe the U.S. plans to assassinate the president and invade Venezuela. Thus, the U.S. ambassador, Drug Enforcement Agency, U.S. diplomats, everybody's out. They're all spies. This insult has been met with very, very tepid response from people in this city. And that's under Bush as well as Obama. Likewise, food scarcity is seen as caused by food distributors like Polar, which is why it's being punished for hoarding, but no evidence of hoarding can be found because there's virtually nothing to hoard in Venezuela. As anybody who's been trying to buy anything knows. It's not producing anything. That's the problem. As for the atrocious violence in Venezuela, this is really hysterical because the government's position, first of all, recognize that violence is at the level that homicide rate is equal to a country in wartime. It's one of the highest in the world. The government believes the violence is largely caused by movies and by telenovelas that promote violence, that are aired on private TV. Not public TV, private TV is the problem. So while tolerating the reality of violence, the government is prosecuting any media that would report the violence. That's the crime, as far as they're concerned. This is more M plus D minus A equals C, as far as I'm concerned. So if you show bodies in a morgue, riot deaths in a prison, starving beggars in the street, anything like that, you can get arrested in Venezuela. So my business is not really the one you want to be in. When Monica Spears and her husband refused to unlock their car door during an armed robbery on a highway, they were shot and killed as her 5-year-old daughter Maya watched, and she was wounded, and she was in the back seat. World media finally took notice of this grisly crime and the outrageous increase in murders during the Chavez and Maduro years. Venezuela has 40 times the murder rate of Europe, and this is what the students were protesting against on February 12th, when they too were shot by the military, Maduro now admits, although Leopoldo Lopez has been arrested for the subject for being its intellectual author. In polls, over 70% of the public said crime was the major problem facing the nation, and Maduro had to do something about that on this Monica Spears murder. So this is what he did. In a classic Orwellian meeting, He took all the TV network executives together on January 20th, and he blamed the few remaining private TV stations for generating the increase in violence and murders in Venezuela, especially the movies like Spider-Man, which he says the media has put on intentionally to create the violence. And in any case, the violence numbers that you're reporting are also an error. You're inventing those. So he pledged to crack down on the broadcast stations and write new restrictions for cable stations. The facts are here. The government has put the guns on the street through its popular army, its gangs, its cocaine trade. Maduro is blaming the private media for violence actually fostered by government policy. And if the government can extinguish the last gasps of free speech in Venezuela, this problem will be covered up and Maduro will be insulated from the truth, just the way Castro has been for the last 50 years. But when so few speak out and so far more remain silent in the face of those kinds of absurd charges, the price Maduro must pay for eliminating free speech is diminished, and that encourages him to go for the kill. This is one of the more interesting things about what the Venezuelans feel is like, why, especially in the North American sense, why are you so concerned about the human rights situations in Syria, say, and Afghanistan might be very, very real, Crimea, whatever, etc., but you have absolutely none here. These are the four largest private media that are still standing in private hands. Venevision, Televen, El Universal, the newspaper, and El Nacional, the newspaper. I've written for all of these and worked for all of these media. Televen is reportedly up for sale. El Nacional is under government pressure to sell to frontmen. El Nacional is also being prevented from buying dollars from buying print, so it has to reduce its publications to about 1/2 size. And the others are under threats of survival just about every day. The government's involved in. The government is over there in their offices every day with the tax people, from the Senate or from anybody looking at what they're doing. So if those private media get eaten by the government media monopoly, the last remnants of democracy and cultural inclusion will disappear from Venezuela. And I think this is very, very important. Even if those newspapers and TV stations can't report fully everything, not having them there at all is a huge problem, just like the disappearance of RCTV was a major, major problem for the country. So we have to recognize what's happening is going according to plan. In 2004, you had the media hegemony plan, then you had the media content control law, the gag law, journalists call it. In 2006, you have 49 private stations taken off the air. In 2006, you have RCTV loss. 2007, you have Global Vision sold to Government Palace last year. And in February, Maduro shut down NTN 24, and he suspended the credentials of CNN to cover what you're looking at. The international media is now looking at Venezuela, but without free local media, the world will know nothing about Venezuela except through the texts, the tweets, and the emails that escape the government net. And there's enormous problems with overstatement, hyper things, or straight lies or disinformation from the government that goes through those things in order to discredit all of the tweets. All right, so this is a major problem that we've got in Venezuela, and I think this is the last hope. There's a very interesting thing happening here, and for those Venezuelans that are here, if there are any who see TV, there's a very interesting thing happening here. The audience is not going along with the media hegemony of the government. They're voting every minute for private media and on channel selectors. With 2 private channels, they continue to attract 80% of the audience, while the 8 national channels, the state channels, attract 1% or less. VTV gets about 12% of the attraction. It's a very interesting piece of data that you can get every day there, because it's kind of like a rolling referendum on like what world do you want to live in? The one they're making up with, which is about Cuba, basically, or do you want, or the one that is filled with, crime, homicides, corruption, a whole bunch of bad news, but also freedom and a choice? Venezuelans are watching private news because it tells both sides of the story. In surveys in 2012 and 2013, they found that Televen and Venevision were reporting balanced news, which might be anodyne as far as we're concerned, but it's both sides are there, while the state TV channel, VTV, was running like total all pro-government stuff, and Global Vision, which is a private channel at that time, was running only anti-government stuff, and it too was unbelievable. Actually, a TV station has got to get out of politics and get into the middle ground where it can report both sides, or else it's not going to be able to, it's not a political party. It's not going to be able to exist in a partisan way. So a big majority of Venezuelan TV audience wants balanced news. They want these newspapers and the TV stations in the middle, and that's an interesting part. Here, look at this. VTV is the state channel. It's only got 11.5% of the audience, whereas the government always gets 50% in the elections. And so, the only way the government gets the audience is when it mandates it. And they do this all the time with thousands of hours. Some of the speeches have gone up to 8 hours. They take all TV stations, and all you can see is the government. But when Venezuelans are free to choose what they want to watch, they choose independently produced private media. So these stations are the last bastions for free speech there. And this is also interesting. The AB group is the top income group, and the E group is very, very poor, $1 per person per day. And in the poverty group, VTV is beaten by the private channels 8-1. So among the Chavez voters, and you can see that on the bottom graph, that the private channels are drawing bigger audiences from all the political viewpoints, including the barrios where the Chavez voters are. So this goes on to show pretty much the same thing, that basically the population, if they get a chance to choose, it's going to be over there with the private media and the free speech. But if it's kicked off the air, they're not going to be there. And with this, this is very, very important, I think, for us to recognize, especially if, from the North American point of view. Audiences television is just not about that news. Television is an entertainment medium. The movies, the stories, the game shows, the ads are part of the cultural inclusion story. And then when you get the Chavez voters and the barrio people into the mobility and the stories of the telenovelas, the hope of inclusion, the social mobility that's shown in those, you're doing something regardless of whether the news is being cast correctly. It's worth having that out there for the market itself. The free mix of entertainment and information supports a culture of inclusion. And Venezuelans, I would always argue, are an inclusive society, and this division, this class warfare that has been started there is completely fabricated for political purposes. This is not Afghanistan, Crimea, or Syria even. There is no religious, racial, geographic, historical division between the people who are supposed to be fighting a class warfare against each other. I see you shaking your head. This is very dangerous. On October 14th, the jurist and former Interior Minister Asdrubal Aguilar reported in El Universal that President Maduro had created by decree a military directorate that controls the information, the secrets, and the censorship in Venezuela, which Aguilar argues is not only unconstitutional, but it's equivalent to the National Intelligence Directorate under Pinochet. A secret military police state is under plan here. And this is also part of what's going on here. And so Caracas Chronicles posted on the 17th that their analysis of the Plan de Patria is intended to restrict free speech and creates what can be defined as a permanent state of martial law. And we're really, really close to that right now. So even though most Venezuelans are clearly alarmed by what's happening to their freedoms, they want a dialogue and the peace, there is no apparent internal democratic solution to the crisis. The government has the power, the money, the guns, and they're using them with a vengeance, and that's the way it goes. And there's hardly a peep from external powers to object, no less to intervene in Venezuela's implosion. You can just imagine the OAS intervening in Alaska. I mean, it's just unbelievable how weak the OAS is. The U.S. has been very, very tepid about this subject for a long time. UN is hogtied. Most of the Latin American states, a couple of states will speak out, but it's, you know, Chile or maybe Colombia, that was actually surprising to me. But the other states are beholden because of the oil power and so on, the money, and so on. So what are we winding up with? We're winding up with a regime that really is connected only to Cuba, Iran, and Syria, for example, as its closest friends, and everybody else is out, and they're right, and we're wrong, and they're in control. So this is the problem. I mean, I have a 19-year-old Venezuelan son living in the U.S. and going to school here. But over 1/3 of the Venezuelans have been born since 1998. They're being taught that way, that, you know, the way things are, bad as it might be, this is paradise on earth. And what we're witnessing today is an annihilation of democracy. And we have not seen that. We haven't seen a country move towards democracy in 1958, first nation to move towards democracy. And, you know, it's in a burgeoning state, yes, and M plus D minus A equals C, that has always been there, as a piece of it is here, too. It's in every culture. But Venezuela was getting somewhere, and it looked like the story was going to, turn out a lot different than it is today. So my only case is, let's not leave the children in the dark. Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much. A very powerful accounting of what has happened in Venezuela. Next, we're going to talk about what it means, not just for the people of Venezuela, but for the region, for our own country. And I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Luis Fleischman. He was a senior advisor for the Menges Hemispheric Security Project at the Center for Security Policy, and he co-edits its America's report. He is the author most recently of a terrific book, Latin America in the Post-Chavez Era, the Security Threat to the United States. In addition to his other good works, Luis is an adjunct professor of sociology and political science at Florida Atlantic University's Honors College. And we're delighted to have you with us. Luis, over to you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate, Frank, your generosity and the fact that you enabled this program. Thank you so much to the staff of the Center for Security Policy, Ben Lerner and Adam Savitt. And certainly thank you, my gratitude to Congresswoman Eliana Ross-Lethinen and the staff for making this possible. Michael presented a very compelling situation as to how Venezuela is becoming more and more a totalitarian regime, namely a state that aims at controlling civil society as a whole, trying to reduce the spaces of civil society, the room of maneuver for civil society, and basically eventually what they want is to make the state into a controlling entity over the needs and over the aspirations of civil society in order to impose their own utopian vision. But the question is, and this is what I'm going to discuss here, is why it's important for the United States to make sure that democracy is restored in Venezuela, or to be involved in Latin America to make sure that democracy is maintained and is preserved, not only in Venezuela, but also in other countries that have adopted similar patterns. So the danger is that the Chavez-inspired Bolivarian regime is not purely a Venezuelan phenomenon. is a revolution that has transnational aspirations and therefore has implications well beyond the borders of Venezuela, including implications on the United States, as I will explain later. First of all, Chavez has actively tried to influence the internal affairs of neighboring countries, either by supporting candidates financially and politically, candidates that he knew were going to follow his model or going to adopt his blueprint. And of course, he scored major successes, like as it is the case of Bolivia, Ecuador, and Nicaragua. Of course, Cuba was already on board. And all these countries, particularly Bolivia, Ecuador, and Nicaragua, moved very quickly to adopt Chavez's agenda, that blueprint that Michael Rowan just described. Likewise, the government of Chavez also tried other methods such as trying to convert countries that were either liberal or conservative and try to make them into part of the Bolivarian revolution. And that's the case of Manuel Zelaya in Honduras, a guy that was basically elected on behalf of the Liberal Party, that is a very traditional party in Honduras. All of a sudden, he was tempted by Chavez to adopt his blueprint also. And this attempt was almost successful, didn't succeed. We all know the story, I don't need to go over it. In some cases, the Bolivarian government of Venezuela tried subversive tactics, like, for instance, several years ago in 2007, they funded violent groups that acted in the region of Puno with the support of the governor of Puno in Peru, against the authority of President Alan Garcia, whom Chavez considered to be an enemy of the revolution, or somebody that certainly was not on his side. You know, and if you remember, in the mid 2000s, there was great tension between Venezuela and Peru. And of course, Hugo Chavez also created the Bolivarian Alternative for the Americas, also called ALBA, in order to expand the social and political principles of the Bolivarian Revolution. In other words, ALBA looks, it sounded like a trade agreement between several countries or some sort of economic group, but in reality it's a strongly ideological group that aims at expanding the Bolivarian Revolution, and the idea is to bring more countries under the hegemonic power of the Bolivarian Revolution. Now, what is the purpose of exporting the revolution? Two parallel goals are being sought. First is to expand the model to other countries. And secondly, to achieve regional domination through the promotion of new authoritarian regimes. Now, the question is, if a country such as Bolivia or Ecuador, let's say, sympathize with Chavez, but they don't abolish, and they maintain like a regular democracy, what would be the problem for the leaders of Venezuela? The problem is that these guys could be only temporary allies, because in the next election, somebody else could have been elected, and then Chavez would have lost an ally, all right? Therefore, the idea of exporting authoritarianism, and we know that one of the terms of the agreement between Chavez and Manuel Zelaya in Honduras is that he was going to try to secure re-election for life. First a referendum, and then adopt the Bolivarian blueprint, and then secure re-election for life. Now, what is the reason? The idea is that if Chavez created a circle that was composed by a handful of tyrants, that facilitates the goals of the revolution that are not only domestic, they also include dangerous alliances, such as alliances with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, drug cartels, and Iran. And this is where the problem of the abolition of democracy or the deterioration of democracy lies. In other words, we can find more and more revolutionary leaders who have a foreign policy that is dangerous to the region and also dangerous to the United States. So in this sense, I connect democracy or deterioration of democracy with a geopolitical threat. Of course, ALBA members are not only those who have adopted the Chavez blueprint, but Chavez, through largesse, let's say, also includes several Caribbean nations like Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Vincent, the Grenadines, and other small countries that, even though they have not adopted the Bolivarian blueprint, they are still allies, and you will see later, I will show how these alliances have geopolitical implications. Somehow all these countries are somehow involved in all the dangerous alliances that I mentioned above. So let's talk a little bit about the relation with the FARC and the drug cartels. The Venezuelan government has become a de facto partner with the drug cartels. On the one hand, we are talking about the fight against the drug cartels in Mexico, and most recently there was a major victory. I mean, one of the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel was apprehended. But on the other hand, you have Venezuela basically giving to the drug cartels all the airports and the ports. In other words, all the drugs that are coming from Colombia or from Latin America in general export their merchandise either to Europe through Africa or to the United States through the Caribbean and Central America by using Venezuelan ports and Venezuelan airports. And by the way, this is not news for the American government, because that was already documented in a 2009 report ordered by then Senator Richard Lugar. And it's there. At this point, I do not know exactly how the US government reacted to that report. But the idea is that we are fighting against the Mexican drug cartels, we cooperate with the Mexican government, and meanwhile Venezuela is doing this. So it's not a matter of corruption in the top elite of Venezuela, the fact that they are linked or they have connections with the drug cartels. Is the Venezuelan government policy to engage the drug cartels. And the report says there is corruption. Yes, there is a difference between corruption. Corruption is nothing new, and certainly nothing new in Latin America. But certainly what we have is an official policy that promotes relations with the drug cartels. What is the problem with that? As drug cartels advance, they destroy state institutions, they can bribe judges and police officers, the military, and other elements that are crucial for state stability and institutional stability. So the danger is that the state may be replaced by the rule of non-state actors, and this is going to inevitably lead to the Afghanization of the continent. That means, and I'm going to give you an example, Guatemala is now in a state of disarray. Private security firms have 60,000 employees on staff, while the Guatemalan National Police Force employs only 20,000 people, and the military approximately 15,000. That means there is no state in Guatemala. It's a state in disarray. And more countries are being affected by this phenomenon, which is the drug-related corruption, like the Dominican Republic, Honduras, El Salvador, and even Costa Rica. Honduras is another country in disarray. El Salvador is another one too. Now, the more these drug cartels advance, the more we will be facing a situation of anarchy that is perfectly comparable to the situation of Afghanistan. And if we have a situation of increasing anarchy right here in Central America, which is a few hours flight from where we are right now, we are going to have tremendous influx not only of crime, but could be also of terrorists and also of rogue states, external forces. And Iran already has a presence in many of these countries. This is just to give an example. And that, of course, will make the continent into a security threat, as dangerous non-state actors might settle without restrictions. And of course, as I said before, there is already a presence of several terrorist groups in the area. Now, what would be the reason why the Bolivarian Revolution could seek this relation with the drug cartels? The drug cartels can live protected by the Bolivarian Revolution. In other words, there will be like a vacuum of power when the Bolivarian leaders would expect to put Bolivarian presidents to win you know, there will be such vacuum of power that eventually, you know, Bolivarian-type candidates could win the elections. And that will be a good deal because a Bolivarian president can protect the drug cartels, while the drug cartels can allow, you know, those Bolivarian governments to rule, Bolivarian-type governments. So it makes perfect sense from a sociological point of view. With regard to the FARC, based on the documentation taken directly from the FARC files, the so-called also Reyes file that were taken back in March 2008 after a raid that the Colombian military did in Ecuador, carried out in Ecuador, we can see that the FARC plays two roles. One, it creates a paramilitary group of defense for the revolution. And secondly, the FARC is viewed as a strategic ally for the creation of a continental revolutionary bloc that would consolidate the hegemony of the Bolivarian revolution in the region. And indeed, what we are seeing is not only that the FARC was used by the Venezuelan government and was given free movement within Venezuela, but also the FARC had been involved assisting and training several guerrillas and radical underground groups in countries such as Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Paraguay. But the Venezuelan government provided the FARC with weapons, about $300 million in weapons, that those weapons were, the Venezuelan government acquired them from the Russian government and then transferred them to the FARC. And of course, the FARC today has a presence in several countries, particularly in those countries that are allies of Venezuela, like Ecuador, Bolivia, and Nicaragua. The presence of the FARC is very strong right there. Finally, the last point that I want to touch is the relation of the Bolivarian revolution with Iran. Ideologically, both revolutions, the Bolivarian revolution and the Islamic revolution, are seeking to diminish the power of the United States in the region and even break its status as a superpower. Iran looks to expand friends in the region, not only in order to avoid sanctions, and they have done it through the Banco Industrial de Venezuela and other financial institutions, not only in Venezuela, but also in Ecuador and other countries. They effectively avoided the international sanctions by using the financial institutions in Venezuela and Ecuador. Secondly, Venezuela also sold gasoline to Iran as international sanctions were taking place, and Venezuela never paid the price for that. There is another element here, that is, as Iran is developing nuclear weapons, it has been reported that it helped extract uranium and lithium from Venezuela and Bolivia. But most important than that is what happens once Iran acquires nuclear weapons. Yesterday, I heard a panel of experts on Syria, on the situation in the Middle East, that were saying why Iran is so interested in keeping the Assad government in Syria in power. The reason is because the Syrian government helps protect Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is crucial in case Israel carries out a military action on Iran. The presence of Hezbollah in Lebanon is crucial to basically blow a strike on Israel in case the Israelis actually carry out a military action. Now, one scenario that we still don't have evidence on that, but one possible scenario in the future is that either Venezuelan soil or one of Iran's Latin American allies could be a place where Iranian missiles could be placed. That is a major geopolitical threat. And I'll tell you one thing, that already there have been reports. One time was by the newspaper Die Welt, the German newspaper in 2010, and then later, 1 year later, the Nuevo Herald. reported about the presence of missiles in the so-called Paraguaná Peninsula in northern Venezuela, very close to Colombia and Panama. Now, I never heard a confirmation that these missiles are there, but that doesn't mean, but from me as a person, as a sociologist, as somebody who analyzes human behavior, I can tell you that that makes perfect sense to me, and I believe that it is important to investigate exactly what is going on there, because it has been reported already twice with a difference of 1 year. There is another element, and now I go to the smaller partners of Chavez, of the Bolivarian revolution in Alba, namely the Caribbean nations. Countries such as Dominica, for instance, Dominica is a very small island in the Caribbean. Dominica signed an agreement with Iran, according to which Dominica would provide passports and Dominican citizenship, to Iranians. St. Vincent and St. Kitts also provided passports and citizenship to Iranians. And that's very interesting. If you have a Dominican passport, by the way, when I talk about Dominica, I talk about Dominica, not the Dominican Republic, you are part of the British Commonwealth. So that already creates a problem. If you recall, in 2007, there was a failed attempt at blowing the JFK. There was an attempt to carry out a terrorist attack in JFK that was caught on time. Nothing ever happened. But the terrorist that planned that attack was an Iranian terrorist whose basis was in Guyana. That is another example of cooperation, very dangerous cooperation between Iran and ALBA members. Guyana, by the way, is not a member of ALBA, but is a friend of ALBA, what is called, a non-partner friend of ALBA. Last but not least, two ships full of weapons were intercepted, one going to Lebanon to Hezbollah and the other one going to Bashar al-Assad in Syria from Iran. The ship was carrying the flag of Antigua and Bermuda and was caught one time by the Israelis and another time by another country, but I forgot which one, I'm sorry. I have it somewhere. In other words, that is another example on how the presence of Iran is very subtle sometimes, but no less dangerous. And not to speak about the fact that Hezbollah cooperates with drug cartels, and we remember the case of the attempt to assassinate the Saudi Arabian ambassador in October 2011. And that was basically, there was cooperation between Hezbollah and the drug cartels. At this point, it is being reported also that in Bolivia, ALBA has a military basis where radical revolutionaries are being trained, and it has been reported that between 50 to 300 members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards serve as trainers in a military school based in Warnes, Bolivia. Now let me go a little bit to some recommendations. I hope I'm okay in terms of time. I have a couple of minutes. As we have seen, the Bolivarian-led widespread authoritarianism may have geopolitical consequences. Therefore, a real democracy could be an antidote to this threat. So the United States should take a strong stand in favor of democracy and constitutionalism. And first, the United States should enlist the help of regional allies and apply the OAS Democratic Charter. And Michael is absolutely right. The OAS Democratic Charter was never applied to the countries of ALBA. It was applied in the past to countries such as Peru, when Fujimori carried out a self-coup. In Guatemala in 1993, when Serrano carried a self-coup. It was applied in Haiti also, after Aristide was deposed. But was never carried out against the deterioration of democracy in the Bolivarian countries. Now, One of the reasons is, listen, nothing in the OAS Charter indicates that we should interfere in the internal affairs of countries because there was no coup. There was no coup in Venezuela, there was no coup in Bolivia, there was no coup in Ecuador. In other words, the excuse is that because there is no coup, so we shouldn't, there is no coup, we shouldn't interfere. But the reality is that the spirit of the OAS Charter means also opposing to these kind of things that Michael described, like intimidation of people, restriction of freedom of the press, the creation of paramilitary based on facts that actually kill people arbitrarily. These kind of things should be condemned, or for some reason, I mean, all these countries need to suffer the consequences of what they are doing. But the OAS refuses to do anything, and we heard Insulza as late as yesterday. Insulza is the head, Jose Miguel Insulza, the head of the OAS, saying we will not interfere in Venezuela because it's an internal affair. What is more, there is support by Latin American countries for Maduro, and that support not only includes the ALBA countries that support the government of Maduro in this crisis, is also UNASUR. For instance, UNASUR, which is another organization created only by Latin American and Caribbean countries, not including the United States or Canada, they declared that they, after the riots that began 3 weeks ago, they declared that they support the people of Venezuela, but also the government of Venezuela. What does it mean? In fact, what this means is that they are supporting the government of Venezuela. And that includes Brazil, because the government of Brazil, the government of Lula da Silva, and now the government of Rousseff, they believe that the presence of Chavez before and Maduro now is crucial for regional integration. And this statement is false, because regional integration is a matter of economic convenience, and whether Maduro is there or somebody else is there, they will support regional integration anyhow. But Brazil, for some reason, feels that the presence of Hugo Chavez, of the Bolivarian revolution is crucial to advance the interests of the region, and that will lead eventually to a second independence, what they call. So this is why it's extremely important to have more involvement on the part of the United States. The United States so far has remained passive. It has not tried to apply its influence in order to make the countries of Latin America, the Latin American countries, to abide by the OAS Democratic Charter. And I would say the following, that if regional diplomacy does not work, I think we need to go for oil sanctions. Venezuela depends on the fact that they sell oil to the United States. 97% of their oil is sold to the United States, and not only that, in the United States is where the Venezuelan oil is refined. So I would say that the United States, in case diplomacy doesn't work, should appeal to sanctions in order to apply pressure on the Maduro government to democratize the country again, to restore democracy, I would say, and to stop this totalitarian tendency that has been taking place for the last 15 years. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you.
Luis, thank you very much as well. Well, we've had, it seems to me, the compass boxed here, as they say, between what is happening on the ground in Venezuela and what it portends if it's not addressed. And the absence of American leadership is a leitmotif that comes through in both of these presentations. With this, we'd like to open it up for questions or comments, brief comments, preferably questions, brief questions for that matter, that our two speakers could respond to. If you are interested in posing a question or making a comment, please identify yourself, and we will. And if you have a preference as to which of them answers it, we'll also take that aboard. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Lilia Machado for Justice for Democracy. We are a group of attorneys from Venezuela that protect or help to protect human rights. how likely is that the U.S. government takes into consideration the recommendations that are being made here? I mean, it seems to me as a Venezuelan, as I've seen everything that is happening every day, I see it impossible that just by our students in the streets, something is going to happen. It has to come from either the military, which I don't think is going to happen anything because what he explains of the corruption. So we need somebody who help, and I don't know how likely it will be that the U.S. government will intervene either by the resolution, that is to freeze the accounts, the assets, or by somehow, I don't know, I just want to know how likely will be that any of these recommendations or any actions the United States will take.
May I make an opening comment and then invite you two to address it? My own feeling about it is that, in part, that depends on us. I mean, part of why we wanted to have this program and why we're delighted to have Congressman Rose-Leighton and offering her resolution is to give the U.S. government, the administration specifically, the strongest of encouragement to take action in the face of this latest horror. And let's face it, as you've heard, this is just one manifestation of a deadly cancer inside our hemisphere. So my own feeling is there's not much reason to be encouraged on the basis of the Obama administration's performance to date, or, frankly, the failure of successive administrations to pay as much attention as they should to our own, I think of it as our front yard. But I think this is a moment where the blood in the streets and the clear desperation of the people of Venezuela offers an opportunity if it's seized upon by folks like us. So we're delighted to have you, and thank you for what you do as well.
I'll let you speak to this. Let me be, really awfully frank here. After running political campaigns in this country in 40 states, all right, I'd say the possibility is almost zero for the U.S. to do anything, including two unbelievable things. One, the appearance of institutions, democracy, human rights, values, judiciary, independent, standing up for those has been a matter of talk in both administrations, I think, and not reality. They don't really care what's going on the ground, apparently. I think they know what's going on the ground. I know the Pentagon knows for the last 15, 20 years. They know everything we're talking about here today. And the Pentagon is very, very concerned about all of that. But the U.S. is not going to use any military thing, not after the history we've gone through here. So there's going to be, that's completely off the table. So there's, absolutely no intervention. So I say no intervention, interested only in the appearances of the institutions so that they have kind of a way out of being tepid and polite about, oh, that's terrible that you're killing those people, that kind of thing. And then the second thing is they are not talking about the fundamental interests of the United States that are at stake here. One is the oil, which they don't need anymore, but they're the only buyer of at full price, and that's propping up the government for the last 5 years. Without the U.S., this government is gone. There's nothing good that's going to come out of that for Venezuelans anyway. It's going to be an enormous amount of conflict and chaos in that country for a long time. But for the U.S. to be participating willingly in this way, while they're thinking about sanctioning in Crimea or whatever, and Syria or wherever. I mean, they use sanctions all over the world, but they would never, it hasn't even occurred, and it's hardly even in the resolutions. They take the oil off the table. Why is the oil off the table? Good heavens, it's ridiculous. So, and the other thing is that they're selling them. They're selling them oil, and they're selling them the imports. So the U.S. is getting a lot out of the trade relationship with the country that, it denigrates them all the time and so on, but they just let them do that and laugh all the way to the bank. I'm very cynical about it, I'm sorry.
I I agree with Frank that I agree, in fact, with both of them, because it's important for the Venezuelan community, and I would say even for other communities that support this case and are, to meet with members of Congress. I know in Florida that has been happening, and that has been pretty successful. I know pretty much on a bipartisan basis there has been support for the situation in Venezuela. I believe that the most difficult thing is probably to convince the United States that this situation is serious. And there shouldn't be any, the US administration, namely President Obama. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge. And I believe that Congress can do it. Congress can apply pressure, like the resolution that is being discussed as we speak now, I think is crucial.
Eliana's work is great.
Yeah, Eliana has been working, Senator Menendez and Senator Rubio in the Senate issued a very powerful statement.
Durbin is in that as well.
Right.
Senator Durbin.
Senator Durbin, and I believe you should meet with members of Congress. Now, to my knowledge today, I know that a group met in Florida with one of a congressperson that is pretty much close to the president, and that, according to the information, and I don't like to quote information that comes to me through, like what is called a broken phone. The Obama administration is doing things behind the scenes. But the reality is that nothing is going to work if there is not a very active presence of the United States in getting together countries in the region like Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, countries that in fact are expecting American leadership. Mexico also, to a certain extent. So I think there must be a diplomatic effort in trying to make sure that the OAS, Democratic Charter, is applied. But at the same time, I think the threat of sanctions needs to be credible. And in my opinion, the United States can survive without Venezuelan oil. Okay, because it's only 8%. It's only 8% of the oil, and when there was like a big increase in oil prices a few years ago, people were carpooling, and nobody died because of that. So
we don't need the oil here.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so, and I think it's important.
Venezuela's oil at all.
And to fight for energy independence, something that Frank has been a champion of that.
Go ahead.
I believe one of your presentations.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Ben Friedman with Congressman Nadler's office.
Which congressman?
Nadler.
Oh, Jeff Nadler.
I believe one of your. Or is there change?
Well, you brought up the Zelaya thing, so I'll let you handle it.
I think your question is, during the Zelaya crisis, the Obama administration, I think in the beginning condemned the coup and then later was able to get support for elections in Honduras that took place a few months later in November. I think the coup was in June, but finally the United States accepted the elections in November. And I think some countries didn't accept it. Now, I don't know whether you mentioned that the United States was behind the coup. The United States was not behind the coup.
That Chavez was. Sorry. That Chavez was?
No, I'm sorry. I thought that you had indicated that the U.S. had been helpful in resolving that crisis.
Well, it was helpful because it supported elections. But the reality is that when the United States intervened, somehow was able to move the situation into more or less tacit support of the Venezuelan elections. It's true that not every country actually supported it, but at least they didn't resist it so much. And eventually they ended up accepting the facts on the ground. They ended accepting the reality that Honduras was going to live without Zelaya. And that's an example. And believe me, the United States then didn't do much, So try to imagine if the United States gets its act together and, creates, you know, even diplomatically, we are not even talking about military intervention of any type. You know what I mean? But if it gets a little stronger and demands that democracy be restored to Venezuela, I think certain things can be achieved. I'm not saying that it will be what Venezuela once was, but at least, and the fact that events are taking place in the Ukraine is not an excuse and shouldn't be an excuse. You know, what is happening in Venezuela has geopolitical consequences, and it's happening right here in our backyard, a few hours away. You know, if you take a plane in Washington, I think in 4 hours you are in Caracas, right? Something like that.
So, I mean, it's, it's amazing in this Ukraine thing. I just wrote an article for El Universal on comparing the two crises. And, in Ukraine, a lot of Venezuelans say, well, why can't we, have the result that they got in Ukraine, because we have the same number of people, and here's the problems. Because of what I'm describing here in this m plus d minus a equals c, all right? The institutions are destroyed. You don't have any democratic institutions. You don't have a judiciary. You don't have a parliament there. You have one man, one male rule. It's essentially a cult that happens to own the oil company and the commerce and the currency, and everybody's in business with him. Half the opposition is also in business with the government, because they're dealing with the government's currency, the government's regulations, the government's permits, the confiscations, and so on. 10,000 companies that were there in 1999 are not there now. They've been confiscated. They're gone. In agriculture, not just strategic industries and so on. So it's incomparable. You also you have real political parties in Ukraine. You have one political party in Venezuela. The rest of the opposition is all over the place, trying to wonder, how do we get out of this trap? But they don't have any solution to getting out of it either. They don't have an answer like the people in Ukraine have Europe. They want to be part of Europe, all right? So they have that argument. So it's a choice between Russia and Europe, if you want to go Crimea's right or Ukraine's right. Where do the Venezuelans go? Where do they go? I mean, even in terms of separation, a lot of people in the West would like to leave, and Zulia and Techer and San Cristobal, you could argue, already has left. It's a completely, the situation is so desperate. You can't imagine what it is. And as an American who's lived there and then, worked here in politics, it's like, my attitude towards this is like the U.S. does not give, okay, you finish the sentence, about all of Latin America, not just Venezuela, all right? They don't care. They just don't care. They don't want that to appear that way, all right? So they'll do the words and so on, but they would never do anything like what's happening with Russia right now. They're talking about sanctions in Russia for something. When you look at what Russia actually has done in Crimea and Ukraine, it's nothing compared to what Chavez and Maduro have done to Venezuela. But because it's a sovereign matter, the U.S. is going to say, we'll still trade with them.
Let me just say, I think that there have been moments, obviously, in the course of American history where we have done things in Latin America, and there's been times when we've taken a pretty good beating in the region for doing so. Yeah. But on the other hand, we've felt from time to time constrained to do it for our national security interests, and I think those days are coming again. The question is, can we do it under circumstances that are minimally intrusive and costly and damaging? And that's why I think these esteemed experts' views are so important, is that time is at hand, and later is worse, as a general proposition. Yes, there's a question over here. Yes, ma'am? Up.
My name is Guerrero Jimenez. I'm Venezuelan, and I work for Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen. My question was that right now there is a big tension between Russia and the U.S. because of the situation in Ukraine. Just last week, the president of the oil industry in Venezuela, Rafael Ramirez, just got a meeting with Vladimir Putin. They're talking about renovated friendship and financial support. So it should be a concern, even more now than before, to the U.S. government, like a threat for the national security of this country. Because of that, there are other ways that not always are the military to be able to support, like the U.S. have done it in the past. One of these that I've been thinking about is support with money. There is a big disadvantage, like you have seen and you have explained, and many of my friends, because I was a student until a year ago, many of my friends are in jail, and many of them are fighting on the streets, and they have nothing to fight. They are just over there, and the people, and not only the military of the government, also the people that support the government have guns, because the government have given them guns in the past years. So they are all armed, they have everything, and they are fighting against that big regime without nothing. So do you believe it is possible to get some support, financial support from the U.S. government, seeing it like an investment?
Well, this, again, has a very unfortunate answer. The fast one is no. When the U.S. supports the Democracy Initiative or NGOs or whatever, those NGOs are charged with treason or with overthrowing the government and thrown out of Venezuela. This is what happened to Transparency International. It's what happened to the Democracy Institute. It happened to, like, you know, there's an enormous amount. I mean, you know from the legal point of view, like what has happened here. Meanwhile, Chavez was spending from about 2006 until recently about $250 million per year in the U.S., right? 180 million of it was in oil subsidies in 17 political districts where he thought he could make a difference. And he did. He got some members of Congress here who got help from, oh, he's helping the poor people here like he's helping them in Venezuela. That's actually how it was received here. The level of information about what is going on and the number of fools that have been made by, you know, receiving this kind of help and pretending that they're like really signed on to the American Constitution, it's an amazing number of. So financially, the government can outspend you in a political campaign about 1,000 to 1, and they did in the campaign that, for example, in Rosales' campaign. I don't know if you were down there during that campaign. That we ran that campaign only in the barrios. We didn't run it for the opposition vote. We knew we had them. We knew we had to go to the barrios and win in the barrios, and we did. In a lot of those barrios, we won, and in even in Katia and definitely in Patari, today you find enormous amount of like demonstrations going on, and they're just like suppressed by the government. The government would never admit that among its own voters. But I showed you in the TV thing where they are. Those people. Look, in Venezuela, it's a big game that there's a class warfare going on. You know, and you know that it doesn't exist. It is simply a fabrication, and a fabulous one, of Chavez, who, like Goebbels, has convinced a lot of Venezuelans that it exists. And the opposition believes it in many cases, that, you know, it really is an existential kind of like fight, you know, that has some kind of racial basis or something, you know? I mean, there's some people that actually believe that. But when you live there and you work with Venezuelans and you just go through the Zambil, you know, shopping with them, you realize this is one of the easiest going communities that you're ever going to find on the planet Earth. And yes, they can be talked into a fight just like they were when Bolivar was there. But this is an arbitrary fight which is about money. It's about controlling power and money, and that's all it's been. And it's whether you're on the blue team or the red team, and the red team's got it now, and so you have to work with them. So they've made up this arbitrary thing, and then the election's not going to work even when you do fund it and so on. You're going to get outspent. You're going to get out, and then if you beat them, they'll change the numbers. They changed the numbers in 2004. I know it. Penn and Schoen knows it.
As you were talking, I was wondering about something that you alluded to in your briefing, I think, Michael, and that was whether now that so much of the population has grown up under this regime and been subjected to its indoctrination, whether that's beginning to change, whether you're now seeing this kind of class warfare, which sounds a little familiar now that you mention it, the redistribution of wealth and all of that in our own system at the moment. But talk a little bit about that, if you would. Is there, in your estimation, concern that what you've just said may be a thing of the past in the not-too-distant future as communities or generations, really, have been inculcated with this kind of class warfare, emerging as the new face of the polity there?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer to that is yes. And I think that Chavez did very well at that, especially when he went to Bolivia with Evo Morales and so on, because he had the indigenous populations and you had the East-West. You had a real divide in Bolivia. Bolivia is not one homogeneous, or heterogeneous kind of country. And Venezuela really is. Historically, the kinds of conflicts and differences you would find sociologically, I'd love you to speak to this too, they're not there in Venezuela. I studied a lot of sociology when I went there in terms of the, I remember, I've forgotten the name of a very famous sociologist who wrote a book about, he was just dying about the time 2000, 2001, when Chavez was just coming on, and I was spending a lot of time with him, saying, this whole idea is made up of dividing people who, they just don't look like it can be divided up like this this easily. And he said, well, culturally, no, okay, it can't happen. But financially, it can happen. If you get them so that the only way they can get their food is by, saying certain kinds of things, you might be able to talk a whole bunch of them into saying those things, and then the other ones might take that as a brand and start to kind of think. And Chavez understood the linguistics, the semantics of racism, because he created these escualitos, He would talk about the satanic devil worship kind of thing in capitalism or in the northern people, and so on. And he connected that to people who have my colored face, as if that was the most meaningful thing about him, and maybe it was, So it's you had this kind of projection of racism and class warfare on a people that saw a country, increasing its income too fast while they didn't have their peace, and so they had this grievance,
Yeah. Your question was whether we could do something from here financially, correct? No, I totally reject that. Financially, but I would say that politically we can do a lot. Just creating regional coalitions, as I said before. I think if the protests in Venezuela stop, the case of Venezuela will be forgotten a day later, all right? So that means that at this point, you can tell your friends in Venezuela, continue to protest. My guess is that once the regime will feel very threatened, they are going to resort to violence. So I believe that the United States needs to show an international commitment in support of democracy and needs to have partners in Latin America that the United States will find and also in Europe, because Europe already reacted to the Venezuelan situation.
Yeah.
And it was a very good reaction, by the way.
Much better than the U.S., actually.
Yeah, much better than the US, that's correct. So therefore, I would say that start with what is called a strong political statement with coalitions, but just don't let go. If it doesn't work, as I said before, just resort to sanctions. But financial aid to the opposition at this point, I don't see the point. But I do see the point that at the moment Maduro begins well, right now, I think human rights violations need to be denounced right away. So international pressure and continuation of protests should be at this point the path, in my view, of course.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing. I mean, you can always, if you're for any kind of value, like you're against slave labor, so you don't buy a certain kind of product. Well, don't buy their gasoline. Don't buy their gasoline. Just make it a personal thing, so that you can at least do your piece and make your statement as an individual. That I'm not going to be participating in that. I go up to the Citgo stations on Long Island where I live, and I say, you should really take those American flags out of here, because I know exactly why you put them there, because you were associated with the Chavez image, and you don't want to hurt your business. But you're owned by Chavez, and you're owned by people who are producing that kind of oil, and you're standing for the nation. You're not a private company, and you never have been a private company. So, forget it. And you're not going to get my business just because of who you're representing. That's all. I mean, you can start that way.
Did you have a question, ma'am?
Hello, I'm going to sit here. I'm a human rights fellow working in the office of Jim McDermott. I'm just wondering, Jim McDermott? Yes, from Washington State. I'm just wondering, what is the general view of the U.S. from the point of the Venezuelan people? Because you've told us a lot about what the government believes, and isn't there a risk of the people not exactly, or how do we know that market democracy is what they want? And also, is there a risk of when you impose sanctions on them that you then leave a window open for countries like Russia or Iran to fill the place of the U.S. Taking away those sanctions? That's my question. Yeah.
Here, you go.
Oh, you want to go first? Okay, he needs to go.
I know you're going to know this.
No, well, it's not that, well, whatever I answer, I speak for myself. Or what the Iranians are already involved there, okay? The Russians are already, and remember how Putin thinks. I mean, Putin at this point, he feels threatened in the Ukraine or in Georgia. There are certain countries that he will never allow, let's say, to go to the side of NATO. Today, the Bolivarian countries, Venezuela and all its allies, are very good cards in the hands of the Russians and the Chinese. You know what I mean? Even if they don't have one soldier there. Even if they don't have one soldier there, they already are de facto allies with these countries. Now, the Maduro government is going to continue these alliances. But the question is how long it's going to take to replace that oil. The United States, the Venezuelan oil is refined in Louisiana, right? We are the major buyers of the Venezuelan oil. It's not that overnight. If you apply sanctions, effective sanctions, you can really have an effect. That's my view. Look at what happened in Iran. The reason why the Iranians are on the table is because of the sanctions. Not because they like Obama more than Bush. So, therefore, I wouldn't be afraid of that. I think the majority of the Venezuelan people, in fact, have an affinity to the United States. I wouldn't say the same thing, for instance, in Argentina, when there is a general anti-American hysteria, or other countries where there is much more anti-American hysteria. The Venezuelans are not. They are used to come to Miami and, and pretty much the middle class too. It's not just the... So...
the bodyguards too, they love America.
Right. We need involvement. I mean, in my opinion, when you say if we apply those sanctions or if we increase tensions with Venezuela, somebody else will take the place. I mean, this is for me is something that doesn't work. You know, it's like that has been the policy for the last 15 years, and it's not working. You know, Venezuela, from an ideological point of view, is going in the and it's anti-American. End of story. And if they wanted just to cut the oil and have another client, such as China or Russia or whoever, they would have done it a long time ago. You know.
Just add two things. If you look at the Pew survey, the international survey on the attitudes towards the U.S., democracy, and so on, Venezuela is one of the most positive, pro-democracy, very positive towards America, very positive towards the justice system, very positive towards the Constitution and so on. Absolutely, absolutely. Because his interpretation, the reason he got elected was, and I know this because I did the surveys myself, and I watched him get elected. You know, I wasn't involved in the campaign. And I told the opposition when he was at 4%, this guy's going to win, and not only is he going to win, he's going to win with a majority of the vote. Because you guys don't have a message for the poor, and which I wrote several books about, and 1,000 columns, all right? So okay, it's an unreconstructed opposition, okay, and then obsolete, very, very bad. But the populist answer that Chavez gave to them was very simplistic. It was kind of like, you're going to get your piece now, okay? I'm going to get the oil to the poor, all right? But he didn't get the oil to the poor the way Texas did, or the way the Alaska did, or even the way Norway did, or even the way Indonesia does. Everything that the poor got through him, those missions and so on, are all his property. Every hut that was built, every house that's built, every health, clinic that's in the barrios that the Cubans are in and so on, totally owned by the state. And you either act the way he wants you to act, or you don't get you're in line in that mission, believe me. It's the same thing that's happening in Mercal, in the food store.
Hi, Art Harmon, Congressman Stockman's office. A few points. First, you mentioned that Dominica and St. Kitts are providing passports. You did, yeah. What can the United States, what could Congress do to put pressure on them to stop doing that?
Well, I think St. Kitts already stopped doing that because they can. Well, I'm sorry. In my opinion. I'm sorry, I'm confusing between two things. Oh, I'm confusing between two things. I'm sorry. In my opinion, there should be pressure on Dominica not to, and the pressure should come also from Great Britain. Particularly from Great Britain, because that's another example. I mean, how many of these Caribbean nations are linked to countries in Europe? In the case of Dominica, Dominica is part of the Commonwealth. So that means if Iranians purchase passports in Dominica, they can enter Great Britain. And because they can enter Great Britain, they can also enter the United States, obviously.
But Dominica is the biggest receiver of the Alba oil deal.
That's correct. Yeah, it's the biggest receiver. I mean, Dominica is like a small island. I think there is sand and water. There is no more than that. Oh, yeah.
All of their electricity is now produced with Venezuelan oil.
Right, right. So I think it's up to the. I mean, first of all, we have to deal with the issues. You know what I mean? To my knowledge, you have to check. Maybe something has been done behind the scenes. God knows, I don't have access to the behind the scenes things. But I find out. I think it will be very helpful for you to find out, and through the office of the congressman, and see what you can do. Definitely pressure, because this is a security problem. That means, the Dominica can be a bureaucratic incubator of terrorists.
Sure. Yeah. There's just a lot of pieces. Yeah. Just one other thing for your congressman is it would be really interesting to know in terms of the penetration of people with Venezuelan passports into our transit and transportation of things and people because of the oil ships, planes, trucks, locations, and there's an enormous amount of movement of things. And this is how a lot of the cocaine is moved, too. What I'm saying is that there are people with Venezuelan passports and through the PDVSA ships and so on that have a certain kind of penetration in our society. If the Iranians had that, for example, we would identify, like, where is that penetration? You know, where are those 7,000 gas stations? Where are the refineries? What are the companies in between? Just to identify from a security point of view, what is the penetration here of these people? What if Hezbollah or Iran is coming through that channel, all right? At which they are, that we know they have the passports and so on. So, I mean, that's what I would be concerned about.
Well, and look at what happened with Guyana. I mean, the whole plot against the JFK airport, that was done from Guyana by somebody with a Guyanan passport on behalf of the Iranians. So these are things that actually can have tremendous consequences, you know, for the U.S. security. Yeah. Like 9/11, that's exactly right. 9/11 was relatively a simple operation. If you think about it, even though it required a lot of plan. But it was, among other things, was this deceiving kind of what kind of passports this guy had. Didn't they get the visas after they were dead? It was.
Yeah. Two other things. On, give me a little encapsulation of the best legislative strategies to help the opposition.
The opposition really needs a lot of political skill at organizing strategies. Joseph Napolitan, who was my mentor and JFK's campaign manager, Hubert Humphrey's campaign manager, got me into this business about 30 years ago. And he was working in the Lucinchi campaign. This is in 1983. And he sat down. It was the first time I got into a Venezuelan political meeting. He said, I got three problems with the way you guys are approaching this campaign. One, you don't have a strategy. Two, you don't think you need a strategy. And three, when people outside ask you, well, what is your strategy? You say, it's me. Okay? So Joe did a lot of campaigns, and Venezuelans are fabulous at packaging things, okay? This is why they're really great at sports, at television, at production, at fashion, at, you know, Miss Venezuela, Miss Universe, and so on. They're very, very good at these things, which are really an interesting cultural talent, you know, that they could sell in the world if they had any respect for it, and they don't anymore, that the government doesn't. And they would not get to the content of politics. I went through 2 presidential campaigns with the same problem. And that is when you start to talk economics, when you talk about the model, when you talk about M equals, you know, where corruption comes from, and so on, you have a lot of intellectual understanding of all of this, but no interesting way to approach the reconfiguration of the oil economy so that it actually does address poverty, as has happened in other places. So that's their challenge. They were given it by Ursula Pietri and a number of people during the time of Betancourt. And so the argument is about 60 years old, and they have ignored that as oil has become more and more important to them. Now oil is the only thing that's left, and they still don't know, like, why did agriculture disappear? Why do we import 80% of what we eat? We used to export, you know, agriculture. And so on, they're not thinking about it, okay? This is the problem.
When you ask the question, what legislative strategies, are you talking about U.S. legislative strategies?
Yeah. In other words, what can we do here in this building? You know, you all mentioned sanctions. Certainly,
To say here, yeah.
Sure, we can certainly do sanctions, and if there's a bill, then I'm sure my boss would sign on to it or write one. But what other things would be useful? Say top 2 or 3 things Congress could do.
Well, at this point, the resolution that was written by both the House, by Eliana Ros-Lehtinen, and they are both good, and by Senator Menendez and Rubio are very good. Both of them are very good. Now, there are some differences between the two, because the Ros-Lehtinen resolution basically doesn't call for sanctions, but the Menendez-Rubio does call for sanctions, and the sanctions are on individuals that are involved in the regime and in the current repression. All right, it's like, but they also talk in the abstract about the possibility of cutting oil purchases. So I think if there is legislation in that direction, I think should be in the direction. I think the resolution includes everything. But if you ask me in terms of policy, I would say my personal and humble recommendation would go first urging, or, you know, if you can do that through Congress, urging the U.S. government to engage really in making sure that the OAS democratic charter is properly implemented. And that means pressure on Venezuela to make the changes, and all the changes are in the resolution. And if not, just appeal to sanctions. So it should be a combination of the House and the Senate, you know, and the sanctions should be maybe gradual. You start with little, but then you move. So leave it open so that you have discretion also.
You know, there's one other thing here, too. It would be nice to hear the United States say, you know, that the Cuban model didn't work for the Cuban people. That whole state model and total control of everybody's freedom is supposed to lead to paradise and so on. It didn't. And that, you know, we're 4% of the world's people, but we're 25% of the world's economy. The GDP of the world is ours. We kind of like know about this, and we have some institutions that might be useful for you. Free trade, we'll give it to you if you like open up your economy. The IMF, you need an IMF solution right now. The World Bank, the World Investment, the rule of law, all of these things would be very, very useful for you to learn about, you know? So it'd be very nice for the U.S. to stand up for what's good in its own system, and that really supports, you know, investment, growth, development, freedom, and so on. We seem to forget, you know, what's really good about this country.
But you know what? One thing is a fact. Again, I appeal to the sociological logic, okay? There is no electoral exit in Venezuela. This government is not designed to anything else but perpetuate itself in power. You know, it's not it's like the Assad regime, except with a democratic, some sort of electoral element there, okay? But it's designed to stay in power. That means there will not be any scenario where the opposition will win election. So think about it. So we need to be tough. It's not that if you offer incentives, you know, like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. No, Maduro, in my opinion, you need to really have a real and a credible threat. When I talk about threat, I talk about economic threat. I'm not talking about military threat. Let me make me clear about it, okay? That actually can intimidate the Maduro government, that can put pressure on the Maduro government. By the way, as authoritarian as this government is also gets frightened very easily. That's something that I realized. You know, I've been studying Venezuela for the last 12 years or more, and I realized how easily they chicken out. So maybe that could play to the advantage of the Venezuelan people.
Well, and that's an excellent segue to, well, on the demonstrations. Is that why Maduro has not crushed the demonstrations? And then more broadly, are the demonstrations maintaining, increasing, decreasing? And what can we do to help the people win the day, as in Ukraine or the Arab Spring?
You want to answer that question first, and then I'll answer it.
Yeah, quite frankly, I don't think that when you're facing as much power and gun, you know, as much power as the students are, that it's sensible to encourage them to go out there any further. I know they're trying to do it in a peaceful way, but with the gangs that are owned by the government, and then the gangs create a problem, and then the military come in to solve that problem, all right? And then they have the military, so they can play both sides of that, and then blame it on you and so on, and put the leader, like Leopoldo Lopez, in jail for an intellectual crime that they find out was committed by 7 of their own people that actually did the pulling of the triggers, but the intellectual, author of the crime, the political opposition, is in jail for the crime, whereas the other guys are like, well, they had to arrest them, So it's a really big problem to try and solve it that way, and I think the only small step in this solution is simply don't support that government and let it fall of its own weight. And I would say the way to not support them is don't buy their oil. And I think the oil should be in the sanctions. If you're going to sanction them for trade, sanction them for 90% and 97% of their trade, and not 3%, all right? It's not a serious thing. Everybody knows what that is.
And I agree 100%. Sanctions, 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 and a huge international campaign to isolate them, This is not something light what is happening in Venezuela, and I repeat, that was the core of my presentation. It's not only an attack on the Venezuelan people, and you're going to see more casualties, I'm sorry to say it. There will be more dead people, and it's going to turn uglier and uglier. But we need to stand by what we believe. We cannot continue to be morally neutral, We cannot say it's not our problem anymore, because it has geopolitical consequences on us. So we need a strong leadership. We need a strong leadership. The scenario of Syria cannot be repeated, where now Syria is totally out of control, basically controlled by the Al-Qaeda. The opposition is controlled by Al-Qaeda and all these radical Islamic groups.
Thank you. My name is Mateo Arevalo, and I'm from Congressman Serrano's office, interning here. That's right. So there we go. Thank you very much for speaking. Thank you very much to the Venezuelan activists for telling us your point of view. And my best wishes to your friends to make Venezuela a better society and a more just one. Now, it's been very interesting hearing you today, and I'm just reflecting a little bit that what we see and a little bit the connections that we've made with the Assad regime, and pardon me, but since the Venezuelan government has not killed thousands of its citizens as of yet, that analogy is perhaps a little bit a stretch too far. And a little bit the idea that in Latin America, regimes sympathetic to ALBA might harbor missiles, eventually pointing at the United States. That's a little bit perhaps a stretch too far as well, considering that Iran does not even have missiles yet, and that we'd see... but, a replay of the Cuban Missile Crisis, in the future, that seems to me highly unlikely. But here's just a question, and this is just one small question, that is it feasible that in Latin America we could have, and this is disregarding the current crisis, it's just a general ideological question. Would it be feasible in Latin America to have a society that is not quite what American values is, but something a little bit different, and a little bit different economic values that represents more the poor than anything else? And is this feasible, or is it undesirable? Is it, something completely that, wouldn't be to the taste of the people here on the panel? I'm just wondering this at the moment.
I've spent 40 years working on that question, and I don't find any better solution than the American experiment over the last 200 years in actually producing possibilities, freedom for the poor. And that's a simple answer to it. But here's some other statistics on the matter. When Chavez took over, he had this fabulous thing about using the oil money to help the poor. I wrote a book about how to do that. I worked on doing that in Alaska, for example, where it did work. And since that time, $1.5 trillion went through his hands, okay, of the government. And the poverty rate, according to independent analysis, is at the same 55% that it was in 1998 when he ran for office. Now, I ask you, only a question of like 27 million people. In my own book, I figured with $45 billion, you could move that lower half into the lower middle class. And that's kind of like compared to what we did with the indigenous in Alaska, all right? And $45 billion is a fraction of that $1.5 trillion. So I ask you, like, are we going to only reward people that talk like that? Or are we going to have to say, you're going to have to walk, you have to show me how you help the poor? Not with having little missions run by the Cubans where you have the same infant mortality rate after that you had before, which is awful, right? And on the homicide rate, I'd say to this. About students dying, or whatever. Are you going to count the Venezuelans who are dying? The homicide rate, because of what I'm laying out here on the drugs and the corruption and so on, the gangs and so on, the homicide rate in Venezuela is 122 per 100,000 per year. In this city, which is not one of the best record cities, it's 5, maybe 6, all right? In Europe, it's 2 per year. In Venezuela, in Caracas, it was really high when Chavez took over. It was 15 per 100,000 per year. And now it's 122. Doesn't he get, if that was our president, I mean, wouldn't you say that, on my watch, I was able to raise the homicide rate from 15 to 122? I mean, wouldn't you take it as one of your great accomplishments if that's what you did? He's killed a lot more people than you imagine.
Well, and I want to take on what he says, and I know that it's time to finish this. Now, the problem of crime in Venezuela is not just a social problem. And it's interesting, Michael, that you compare it to Washington and other cities. When you talk about crime in Venezuela, it's not like talking about increasing in crimes, in crime in Miami or in New York or in Washington.
We're not talking burglaries.
What? Here, the reason why there is crime is because the government promoted those thugs to use them to intimidate the population and to kill the population. So these thugs, that some of them actually came out of jail, are giving the full freedom to intimidate the population and are being paid by the government. And that's one of the reasons why you have this high rate of crime, because the thugs are free, and they know they are not going to be touched because they are somewhat connected to the government. Am I right or wrong what I'm saying? So you see what I mean? It's not a social crime. Here is increase of rate for political reasons, for political action. Now, with regard to the poor, not the poor, I'm going to quote Marco Rubio, probably not one of your favorites, all right? But the analysis is very valid. There is no U.S. embargo on Venezuela, as there is in Cuba. For years, poverty in Cuba was blamed, the blame was placed on the U.S. embargo. There is no embargo on Venezuela. How do you explain that there is scarcity of basic products?
Yeah.
All right? Because private enterprise activities, the private sector is gone, almost gone, because it's a government that is against the private sector, because it's an expression of civil society, because it's kind of almost like a communist regime. You know, it has a lot of communist elements. Therefore, you know, and we know from history that a communist regime or a regime that destroys private property eventually doesn't work and creates more poverty. You know, this is why it's not coincidental that it's in capitalistic countries precisely where poverty is less than in other countries. Precisely because it creates the wealth that provides employment and provides, you know, in Venezuela that possibility is almost over. Everything depends on the oil that is totally corrupted and mismanaged because all the professionals were thrown away and they brought political people in to PDVSA, the Venezuelan oil giant.
If they want to be socialists, they want to be Scandinavian, it's fine. I mean, who cares about sociology or ideology? It's the results that we care about, right? Yeah.
It is indeed the results we care about. I think we've arrived at the desired result here, which is a lot of very useful information about a problem that sadly is still not getting the attention that I think it requires in this country. And I would just make one final comment with regard to the possibility of a threat emerging from Iran. As Luisa said, there are ballistic missiles capable of ranging from the northern coast of Venezuela to the United States that we understand Chavez agreed with the Iranians under Ahmadinejad to deploy in Venezuela. It remains to be seen whether it'll happen. But I think that the comment that Cuban Missile Crisis couldn't happen is as ill-advised as the argument that it couldn't happen the first time. It came as a complete surprise to U.S. intelligence that Russian missiles, Soviet missiles then were being deployed to Cuba. This is something that has been announced. We will be surprised by it only because we have not been paying attention if it does happen. And I think it does, when you add in some of the other things that have been talked about in terms of the relationship between Chavez and Maduro now and the Iranians and various terrorist organizations, the sealed aircraft that are now routinely flying in and out, I don't think we've talked about that, from Damascus, from Tehran, from other places into Venezuela is a matter of real concern from a national security perspective, I think. So this isn't all about altruism, this isn't all about human rights, this isn't all about economics, this isn't all about the character of a society. This is in part about just old-fashioned threats to America, and I think we ignore them at our peril. And I'm glad that those of you who've joined us today are not ignoring them. We look forward to, hopefully, further conversations of this kind. Michael, thank you very much. Luis, for the great work that you are doing in your respective capacities. I hope that you'll keep in touch with us. Come on Secure Freedom Radio, our radio program. And we appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us as well. And if you would please convey to Ileana our deep appreciation for making this possible. And thank you for joining us and for her work as we speak on the resolution on Venezuela.